So here we are again, back by unpopular demand. And if I were you, I'd stock up on tinned food and shotguns, get a sleeping bag, and settle in for the night. This is a 17-minute song that I know probably as well as any song in my personal catalogue. A song that has very deep personal meaning for me, has a very interesting origin story that speaks, I think, to the nature of how stories are told and how writers sometimes write, and that also contains an incredible life story. Now, Steve Hogarth is a man who lives his life out loud and, like most of us, tells his stories repeatedly in various forms. I've been lucky enough to interview him on a lot of occasions, and also spend time with him personally and while on the road. And this song was a song we talked about a lot. So there's an awful lot to unpack here, and I think it's an incredible piece of writing and an amazing song. We'll talk some more about the reason why I want to talk about this song as we get going, but I know that some people get hugely irritated if I don't get into the song nice and quickly. So this is Marillion's epic, the album version, which is the cleanest, most elegant version of the song. There are live versions out there. We filmed at least one of them, but I think that the best way to hear this strange engine for the first time is in this format on the album version. So if this is your first time, I'm hoping that you get the best possible introduction to the song. This is Marillion's "This Strange Engine."
Was a boy who came into this world in the hands of a holy woman in a holy place. He wore a red coat and walked a bulldog. He saw them reflected in the mirror of the lakes. Lived in the shadow of the mountains with the smells of disinfectant, dusty old leather and the polished wood of his bed. No more than a baby feeding swans on the river, holding the hand of his mother on the wax paper bag of yesterday's bread. And his father on the other side of the world, on the ship's railings, some faraway side, with the silent dry tear of all thoughts from abroad in his faraway eyes. In his faraway eyes.
So, first to the writing and creation of this song. As a writer, I spend an awful lot of time in writing rooms, hammering up against the wall of deadlines and up against the wall of necessity and writing to order. And that's a particular type of discipline and a particular type of writing. Steve Hogarth talks about the writing of this song, and he describes it thusly. He wakes up one night, in the middle of the night. He gets out of bed. He walks down to his kitchen table. He takes out a pen and a piece of paper, and he writes this lyric, almost in that Amadeus sense of without corrections to follow. He almost entirely captures in one sitting, in one session, this entire lyric from beginning to end. And it is the story of his life. It is a memory of his life from the moment of birth through to at least a very key moment in his life that was going to be dealt with much later in the song. And the way he talks about it, and I say he talks about it, this is not my analogy. He talks about that feeling that sometimes something creative sits in your head, and it bakes like a cake, like a bread. It bakes and it cooks and it rises and it browns. Uh, and when it's ready to be consumed, it emerges full formed. And this incredible lyric, this evocative, multi textured, multi layered lyric, came in one moment of inspiration, one moment of creative flow. Not to his way of thinking like that, but as something that had spent its time cooking in his soul, something that had spent time percolating, brewing, baking in his head. And when it was ready, the oven pinged and he wrote it down in his kitchen. And and as we look at this lyric, I want you to remember that, because that is an astonishing thing. It is astonishing that this came to life in that flow. Not impossible, not unheard of, but astonishing nonetheless. It is a type of creativity that some of us are lucky to experience maybe once or twice. There's maybe been a few moments in my life when I've sat at a computer and written and it's just flowed so perfectly. This was one of those moments for Steve Hogarth. And this is the writing of his life, of the strange engine that was him, his heart, his soul, his being. And then we get into the lyric itself. The older I get, the closer I get to Steve Hogarth's age, the half a dozen or so years that separate us, that might have felt like all the years in the world when we were 5, now feels like barely any. And we're not quite of the same age, but we're of a similar generation. We have a similar, we come from a similar era. So a lot of the things that he talks about here are familiar to me. Some of them are spot on perfect. We'll get to those. But here he talks about there was a boy who came into this world at the hands of a holy woman in a holy place. Sounds like the start of a fantasy novel, but is actually Steve Hogarth talking about being born in Kendal in the Lake District. And born, I can't remember the exact details, but at a convent hospital or at a facility linked to nuns, linked physically to holy women and a holy place. He wore a red coat and walked a bulldog, saw them reflected in the mirror of the lakes, Kendal in the Lake District. That red coat to which he refers, I had one. Most little boys of our generation did. A little red coat with little brass buttons. It was a thing for little boys. You wouldn't see a little boy in one now, but in this age, the red coat, while walking at the side of the lake with your dog, that is such a beautiful early memory. My first ever memory, conscious memory, is being pushed in a pushchair and seeing a train pass underneath us on a railway track. And I waved at the driver and he hit his horn. It is a conscious, living memory. It is the earliest memory I have. My father has a completely different early memory that is way darker, but mine is that. I can see this, the red coat and the mirror of the lake, and the wax paper bag with yesterday's bread feeding the swans on the lake. I can see that and imagine that as one of Steve Hogarth's earliest living memories. And not only does it capture Hogarth's living memory, but it captures a sort of essence of an era. The wax paper bag is quite specific. The idea that yesterday's bread doesn't last until tomorrow is quite specific. These are things for those not quite boomer babies, those post-boomer babies that grew up in a slightly different world to the world that we live in now. And then, the smell of disinfectant, dusty old leather, polished wood of his bed. Again, a very particular sense of an old house with old furniture in a beautiful old place, Kendal in the Lake District. And then he says, meanwhile, while he's living his earliest memory, his father, on some faraway tide, is dreaming Silent, dry tears of home thoughts from abroad. Now, as someone who has spent up to 10 months of a year living away from home and working away from home, home thoughts from abroad in itself is a beautiful line. But that idea of the silent, dry tear and the faraway eyes, we'll come back to that. But for now, we've got the picture of a young boy in an idyllic part of the world in a specific time and an actual life that was written down at a kitchen table. I'm going to say 40 some years later, as we continue through this lyric, don't just imagine the pictures, but imagine that creative process of being able to so perfectly summarize your life like this.
The smell of the wax on the wooden floor, mixture of polish and soap. No children to fear or to play with. Rows of empty hooks for the coats. An upright piano and the boys in the choir still remind him of just before he was born. Remind him of just before he was breezy. Strange misty visions of God. Turn the cities into families, into villages of souls, hovering in the air while they're sleeping, with their houses invisible. Send to me the ghosts of Christmas, whispering, you're the only one.
So, this is probably the least, for me in this song, the least knowable verse. I don't think I've ever heard Steve Hogarth talk specifically about this verse. It's interesting that he mentions smell again, the smell of the wax on the wooden floor, the mixture of polish and soap. The sense of smell is the most nostalgic of our senses. Smell, more even than music, more than books, is the thing that can evoke memory and evoke emotion. I have no idea why that is, but I know it to be a common thing. And here he is, remembering a particular smell of a particular place, remembering a particular time. Now, again, I can't help with this but link his sort of sense memories and picture memories to my own. Another of my earliest memories is the end of a school assembly when I'm at school, so anytime after 3.5, maybe 4 years old, early primary school. I have this memory. I have a memory of lumpy custard, and I have a memory of the site of the school assembly hall with a low sun and the pools of water, the puddles of water on the hall from where kids had pissed themselves. Young children had wet themselves during assembly. And I have no context for that memory, but I have that memory. It's burnt in. It's one of those memories that transcends time. And this sequence feels like a series of of memories of that time when he was still very young in this in Kendal in the Lake District, and then we seem to go into almost a dream within a memory, if you like, a memory of a dream, a memory of that sense of being outside the world, of observing the world from outside. And that really feeds us into where we're going, is this idea of being a little bit of an outsider. Now, we go on in different lyrics and in different places and times to hear some of Steve Hogarth's life story, to hear about the boy who would dress up in a dressing gown to go to university, of the boy who would behave just slightly different to his peers, studying to be an engineer but acting like an artist. This sense of being an outsider, that sense of hovering outside of the world and never quite belonging in the world, it comes through in a lot of Steve Hogarth's lyrics, and I seem to remember he has a sister, but I love this last image. I love this last line. Send to me the ghosts of Christmas whispering you're the only one. And in this case, that's not a threat. That you're the only one feels to me like that sort of small childhood ego that says you're special, you're different, you're somehow important. And we're going to get straight into how important and how different he felt as we get into the continuing verse. There are no choruses in this song. It is, I say it again, it is a telling of his life as he remembered it in this moment at his kitchen table.
And to me the ghosts of Christmas whispering you're the only one. And ever since I was a boy, I never felt that I belonged. Like everything they did to me was an experiment to see how I would cope with the illusion. In which direction would I jump? Would I do it all the same? It's the actors in the game. Or would I spin it back again? Not be caught up in their rules and live according to my own, and not be used to find the fundamental truths. It was gonna take some time, 35 summers down the line. The wisdom of its passing year seems to serve only to confuse. Seems to serve only to confuse.
So, the outsider. In a way, looking at this now in the context of some of the things we've talked about recently, there's a sense of Roger Waters and the Wall to this piece of lyric. There's definitely a sense of the artist as outsider, the artist as slightly different, the artist as rebel. This, thematically, Hogarth is always returning to this sense of not belonging, feeling outside, and pushing against authority, pushing against expectation, pushing against what the world wants to make you, the box into which the world wants to fit you. And if you think about it, the Rush fans that are sticking around for this, Neil Peart pushed against that. The Nightwish fans, if you've come along for this journey, Tomas sits in this similar place of questing and questioning authority and examining the artist's place in the world. This sense of, ever since I was a boy, I never felt like I belonged, like everything they did to me was an experiment to see how I would cope with the illusion, in which direction would I jump, would I do it all the same as the actors in the game? Do we all feel like that? Do we all feel like outsiders? Are we a world of outsiders who feel like everybody else fits in differently to us? Or is that a feeling unique to only some of us? Is that one of the things that draws us to a particular band or a particular writer or a particular thematic that becomes one of the sort of golden threads of our lives? I can relate to Hogarth here in such a specific way. That sense of always feeling outside, that sense of always wanting to fight against the rules, that sense of never wanting to do what I'm told, not just out of a sense of anarchy, but out of a sense of explain to me why. Tell me why. Why must I do what you say? Why is what you say better than what I believe? And not because I'm some kind of anarchist, but because I want to understand, and your argument has to be better than mine. I can completely relate to Hogarth here. And of course, we find in this lyric probably the exact clue as to at which point in his life he wrote this lyric. 35 summers down the line. So 35 summers after the one he refers to here, 35 summers after the attack of bees, which we'll get to. Sometime in his when he's 35, 40 years old, Steve Hogarth is looking back at his life. And as he would later say in Invisible Man, the world's gone mad and I've lost touch. I shouldn't admit it, but I have. He says here, the wisdom of each passing year seems to serve only to confuse. The more you get to understand the world or feel like you've been given information with which to process the world, the harder it becomes to process the world. After 15, 16 months of COVID, how many of us can relate to that idea? The wisdom of each passing year serves to serve only to confuse. Having passed through the dream, the sense of being alone and yet somehow unique and special, but different and outside, the sense of an emerging self then brings us back to the life story, if you will. After a little bit of widdly, widdly, widdly from Mark Kelly, if I remember right.
It was gonna take some time. 35 summers down the line. The wisdom of its passing year seems to serve only to confuse. Seems to serve only to confuse.
Top quality prog. Top quality. Daddy came out of the Navy and took us away to his dirty grey hometown. And he worked out a coal mine for national service so that he could be around. There was a magical purple in the chrome of the exhaust of his Triumph motorbike. said in the introduction that this song means something quite special to me on a personal level. And this is particularly the piece that does it for me. Um, Dad, Daddy came out of the Navy and took us away to his dirty grey hometown. He worked down the coal mine for national service so that he could be around. Steve Hogarth's father came out of the Merchant Marine Navy and moved them to Doncaster, where he then went to grow up and went to his first party, which inspired another great song. And I think he did his university while in Doncaster and met his wife, his first wife. And Doncaster became his hometown, his dirty, grey hometown, that he talks about its dirty greyness in several songs. And his dad did that. It was still a time in the country where national service was required, and you could avoid doing work, being in the merchant marine and serving your country that way if you went down the coal mine. And then a specific and particular memory to Hogarth, the magical purple in the chrome of the exhaust of his Triumph motorbike. If you've owned a motorbike and you've seen that particular purple in the chrome, that's an impossibly perfect description of it, and the warmth of oil and metal and the thrill of the hard corner holding tight. That's a young boy on the back of a bike with his dad. And this is Hogarth about his dad. He came from the horizon, came home from the Navy to the mine, from the horizon to buried alive, took his dream underground, buried his treasure in his faraway eyes, the repetition of faraway eyes from earlier in the song. My granddad was a coal miner. My granddad, Eric Parker, my brother, took his name when he drew. He drew as Parker, Mark Parker. My granddad joined, I think, the Sherwood Foresters by lying about his age so he could fight in the Second World War. He was shot coming down a hill in Italy by members of his own side who were coming up that same hill. Shot in the stomach. Only survived apparently because he was a sergeant by that stage, and they got him on a jeep and raced him to a hospital and fixed him, and he lived. And he came out of the military post-Second World War, and all he wanted to do was be a gardener. All his whole life he wanted to do was be a gardener. And he got a job working in the gardens of the coal mine near where he lived in Nottinghamshire. And then my mother's sisters, the twins, came along, and then my mother came along, and then my nan and granddad fostered a young boy. And Eric, the gardener, could not make enough money being a gardener to support his young family. So Eric went underground, and he spent, I believe, the next 20 or 30 years underground fixing conveyor belts. He came home from the military, from the army. He took his dreams and he buried them alive in the coal mine, because that's what you did to raise a family. Eric Parker was probably the best man I ever knew. And I say that with respect to my father. Eric Parker was probably the best man I ever knew. And when I hear this song, when I think about dreams being taken underground, when I think about treasure being buried in faraway eyes, I cannot help but think about Eric Parker and completely and utterly relate to why Steve Hogarth would want to hold on tight to that man and that memory. So Steve one day told me that he's always loved to sleep in the sun. One of his great ambitions in life is to one day be able to afford, as he put it, to take a four-poster bed, put it on rails so that on sunny days he could wheel it out into the back garden and sleep in the sun. And I guess it was on one of those days that the boy was sleeping in the sunshine when he got attacked by a cloud of bees. And that pain, that agony, that sense of that blue pain, screaming like baptism, intravenous, Jesus, like being chosen, he says. Blue pain from something with no brain. The specificity of this memory, the grabbing out of the ether, the baking in the cake of the bees and the pain and the intravenous Jesus of it all went into the cake and came out in this telling of his life story. Such a beautiful image. Such, again, in its own way, an idyllic image. A boy getting stung by some bees. It's so 1950s, 1960s. It's so innocent, and yet it's beautifully delivered. That sequence came down out of the sky, stung him in the face again and again, blue pain, screaming like baptism, intravenous, Jesus. That is such a great piece of writing, such a great piece of music. And yeah, Steve Hogarth wants a bed on rails so he can sleep in the sun. I'd be willing to kick into a GoFundMe for that, because what a lovely dream. What a small but beautiful ambition. If you're playing the drink with Paul game, I made myself a cup of tea. Take a drink. Steve Rothery's turn. Can we just take a moment to recognize how absolutely elegant Steve Rothery is as a guitarist? How perfectly stylish, not showy, just as many notes as it needs. Perfect bell-like sound. What a beautiful, beautiful guitar solo. Kelly progged out earlier. Rothery just came in and dropped some elegant science on this song.
Sitting like an ember thrown to deep water.
It's very knowable. Mummy, Daddy, sit a while with me, jog my memory, tell me tales of Montego Bay, Table Mountain, flying fish, banana spiders, pots of paint. It's a boy longing to spend time with his parents and share their family's memories, their collective memories. There's a lovely little insight into this. Hogarth does it a lot. Even in songs that are thematically very knowable, he plants in very small personal references. This particular one, banana spiders, pots of paint, it seems a bit of a weird link, but his father apparently tells the story of how in the ships that carried the bananas from the tropics towards Europe, these enormous banana spiders would appear out of the bananas in the hold, and on at least one occasion, as his father told it, the men just painted over the spider with a pot of paint and kept on going, baking that spider into the hold of the ship. The point being, within this sort of grand tale that we can all imagine, stories of Montego Bay and of Table Mountain and of flying fish when your daddy's in the merchant marine, the banana spiders and the pots of paint refer to a particular story. And then to get into the elegant poetry of Steve Hogarth, when he wants to be this man, can paint a very powerful image. And the sun of the equator setting like an ember thrown to deep water, from crimson to black, but coming back tomorrow on the horizon. That is a beautiful image. The ember thrown into deep water as the sun sets. As described as being on the equator at that particular time in the ocean on the far horizon, something that we don't get to see from dirty grey hometowns of Doncaster and Pickering and wherever you might be. Beautiful, beautiful. And then we get into a less obvious sequence that has an amazing backstory. Perfect.
Fades to a point where it doesn't fade. It stays. Blue. Stirred his red coat heart to this strange engine. This love, this love.
So I'm going to stop before this next sequence because the context of this next sequence makes it knowable and understandable and astonishing. Hogarth brings us back to the blue pane of the bees. And from the blue pane and the horizon and the sea and the water and all of these things, he brings us back to the red coat heart of the little boy that is the strange engine. And now he remembers a particular story of his life. As it goes, Steve is playing in a band who's doing, I think they're doing a run from the north of England to Norway or Sweden, one of those ferry runs that is an overnight run, and they are performing on the ship as entertainment on the ferry. And as he describes it, I seem to remember it's the bass player. The bass player is a lunatic, and the bass player gets horrifically drunk and attacks Hogarth one night while they're playing. And he comes at him, if I remember right, with a broken beer glass or something. And he cuts his hand. And Steve Hogarth, who has surprisingly small hands, I've pointed out to him more than once, for a man who plays the piano so amazingly. And he answers back, yes, but he can play an octave, so his hands are more than big enough. He has this scarring on one hand that you can see from the scarring, this was a serious wound. The bass player attacks him, stabs him, cuts his hand. He is bleeding. As far as I remember, there's no doctor on the ferry, and he's on the bridge of the ferry, sailing, I believe, into the dawn, with his hand wrapped up, not sure if he's going to live, not sure if he's going to bleed out, not sure if this wound is going to kill him. And this is the memory that he evokes here. Is that memory of a man bleeding into a cloth on the deck of a ship, considering his life and whether this is the end of his life, and the continuation of the blue pain. And I guess the suggestion that life is pain, that the blue pain in whatever form travels with us. But this last sequence is Steve Hogarth staring out at the sea, into the night's dark deep, not knowing if he's going to live or die, and considering his life. And I think in that context, it's remarkable.
To this strange engine, this love, this love, this love, so convenient, blind, blood diamond, this poison, this love.
This love, this inconvenient, blind blood diamond, this puzzle that I don't understand and knows no faith and tries and fails and tries again. Once again, Steve Hogarth comes back to love. And that inability to understand love and that drive that love is, that is at the core of everything. It's an amazing end to the song, and it's not the end of the song, because I'm happy to see that this particular version is the full-length version of the song, which contains a little Easter egg at the end. And the reason I'm letting it play is to tell this story. When my old partner and I were working in South Africa with a sound man, a friend of ours, Barry Swan, we lent this album to him and suggested he... We suggested that he should listen to it. And he did so one night after we'd been working with him, late at night in this basement of his. And he listened to the whole album and listened to the last song, and then it went about his business late at night in the dark of his sub-basement. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this happened. This strange little, I'll try and find it, I gotta get it. This strange little Easter egg popped up out of nowhere, like a ghost in his audio studio. In the well-illuminated office of my house, that's just a weird little Easter egg. But apparently, in the darkness of a sub-basement on the outskirts of Johannesburg, seeming to come out of the ether, as Barry put it, as if it had come out of the space, the gap, the air gap between the two pieces of glass that separated his studio from his mixing desk. It apparently scared the shit out of him, which is super funny. Also kind of weird to have on this song that is the telling of a life, a love story, if you like to love, a memory of a night when mortality was front of mind, and the continuation of the engine was in doubt. And ultimately, a song about his parents and his family. As I understand it, the words that he got up that night and wrote on his kitchen table, he framed them and gave them to his mother as a gift, which should be worth millions and is priceless and is beautiful. And I think this is a phenomenal piece of music, a phenomenal piece of writing, and a really interesting study in how an artist can work. Sometimes the words come at great cost and at great pain. You have to drag them. You have to go mining for them. You have to take your faraway eyes underground to find the words. Sometimes you puncture the earth and they come spurting out like black gold. And this was one of those times. And because of that, I think it's a fascinating story. Because it's such an evocative life story, and because it's such a great piece of music, an epic piece of music, I think it's a very special song. And because it transports me every time to Eric Parker, the coal miner who took his dreams underground and worked in the coal mine instead of in the gardens to feed and support his growing family. This song will always, for me, be one of the most important songs in my personal collection. I hope you've enjoyed this. I've no idea how long it's gone on. Probably way, 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 way too long. If you're still around, congratulations. I'm taking a drink, so you can take a drink. It's tea, so I'm sober. Hopefully you're playing this game with something stronger, so you can at least have dulled the senses. And know that I am not ashamed. And what I've said here tonight is true. And love, while inconvenient and puzzling, this love is still the most important thing that any of us can cling on to in the night's dark deep. And other cheesy intros, cheesy lyrics, cheesy links to cheesy lyrics. Thanks for watching. I hope you still are. If you are, well done. I'll see you again. Keep the faith.